talk is Beauties and More Beauties, Pornography and Fairy Tales. Now, in the Erotic Museum, located in the red light district of Amsterdam, there's a vivid testament to what Christina Bacchinaga calls, quote, the libidinal power of fairy tales. An entire room dedicated to a mural depicting pornographic fairy tales. In an idyllic sylvan landscape, a prince drools upon a grinning sleeping beauty. A wolf flashes an enormous penis at a perplexed and intrigued little Red Riding Hood. And Snow White, in dominatrix here, presides over the cavorting, horny seven dwarves. Pornographic animated films play on continuously, and viewers are invited to sit upon toadstools and watch or contemplate carved figures of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. These are straight up Disney carvings, while the rest of it is all sort of fan art of fairy tales. Okay, now fairy tales and pornography would seem at first glance to be diametrically opposed genres. Fairy tales are popularly conceived of as the ultimate innocent childhood fantasies, while pornography is proverbially the benchmark for adult depravity. However, upon closer examination, fairy tales and pornography have quite a bit in common. Both genres tend to take place in fantasy universes, where flat, one-dimensional characters move through a series of preordained plot incidents to an imposed happy ending. Both genres negotiate in a variety of ways with the concept of utopia, and both genres are intimately concerned with desire and the fulfilling of desire. It is therefore unsurprising that quite a large number of hardcore pornographic films have borrowed the plots and imagery of fairy tales. Gina Jorgensen, speaking of literary erotic tales, remarks, quote, there's little explicit sex to be found in most literary fairy tales, especially the classic tales of the Grimms, Charles Perrault, and the French conteuses. The overt sexuality of eroticized fairy tales, however, could be viewed as a carnivalesque inversion, making the implicit explicit. Since so many fairy tales end in marriage, to the extent that Vladimir Propp has marriage as the fairy tale's ultimate function, sex is an underlying concern of fairy tales, though it rarely comes to the forefront as it does in erotic literature. Those of you who are familiar with the scholarship on fandom and fanfiction, which Anne's been talking about, Sarah Gwenllian Jones makes a similar argument about slash fiction, which is homoerotic fiction, which is that it's not so much an imposition from the outside of a depraved audience projecting their own bizarre fantasies onto a perfectly heteronormative, innocent text. No, it actually serves to make the implicit explicit, just as Jorgensen says. Now, end quote. Fairy tales and pornography are both gendered genres. Fairy tales are in general associated with a female audience, and pornography with a male audience. Fairy tale porn, in addition to invoking the persona of the innocent stories of childhood, also plays with assumptions about the perceived audience of the films. For one thing, fairy tales have actual plots, ones that are usually more complex than that of the stereotypical porn film, which can be summed up as, here's your pizza man with extra sausage. This is why Pauline keeps me around for penis jokes. However, even prior to the mainstreaming of the internet, which made the most esoteric fetishes visible and available for wide consumption, pornography was always more varied and complex than it was often given credit for, as Linda Williams notes in Hardcore. She argues that structurally, pornographic films most closely resemble musicals. All the action stops for the number, whether it's song or dance or sexual. This ability to pause the action has made the musical a favored means of turning a short, plot-heavy fairy tale into a feature-length film. And the same advantage applies to the pornographic film. Fairy tale porn is a subtype of the broader category of the porn parody, a large and varied genre. While many porn parodies, including some fairy tale porn, limit their references to the target text to the title, such as Snow White Black Hole, or my favorite, The Da Vinci Load. Other films engage more closely with the object of parody, addressing the sexuality that Hollywood films often erase or lie, as Cindy Patton notes. Peter Lehman has discussed how porn films, and especially porn parodies, conventions of plot and characterization are considerably different from that of mainstream Hollywood fare. Now, fairy tales, with their linear plots and flat characters, lend themselves more easily to the porn film structure than other narrative genres. Nina K. Martin remarks that porn parodies often take on male-identified genres, such as westerns and sci-fi. Now, while it's difficult to make claims about the entire subgenre of fairy tale pornography, at least some of the films are directly or indirectly courting a female audience, including one of the films discussed today, the lesbian-aimed and produced film Beauty and the Bush. Fairy tale porn has an obvious Hollywood reference in Disney. Indeed, there are many amateur works of fan fiction and fan art featuring the Disney versions of fairy tale characters in a variety of pornographic scenarios. The Snow White in the Erotic Museum's mural, painted mural, is explicitly Disney's. But more broadly, fairy tale porn invokes what Eric Tribunella, echoing Gina Jorgensen, calls, quote, the carnivalesque pleasure in adult nostalgia, revelry in the taboo, and exertion of adult agency over the artifacts of childhood. Numerous scholars, including Jess Ipes, Marie Tatar, and Marina Warner, have documented the history of how the fairy tale evolved into children's literature. And today, the majority of fairy tale texts not aimed at children call attention to this perceived disjuncture of audience. We all know what fairy tales are, or we think we do. But really, we have two stories about fairy tales. Stories about stories. Stories that matter in some way as much as the tales themselves do. First, there's a story that many of us absorbed, which is usually blamed on Disney films. Fairy tales are sweet, innocent, adorable stories for children. But there's another story that we tell about fairy tales that circulates in popular culture. Now, far from being adorable delights for children, fairy tales are dark, bloody, murderous, and full of illicit sexuality. Postmodern writers and artist filmmakers who tackle the fairy tale are often praised for getting back to the, quote, roots of the genre, for peeling away the Disney-fied layers to get at the truth about the original stories. This story about fairy tales, we can call it the recovery story, is a rescue operation, uncovering the real fairy tale and liberating it from Disney kitty-lit oppression. While scholars have, for the most part, rejected the problematic discourse of traditionalist notions of folk authenticity, the authenticity narrative is still with us in popular culture. And in the recovery story, the bloody and the sexy is authentic. The recovery narrative both contradicts and relies upon the existence of the fairy tales are sweet and innocent narrative for its power. Now, the genre of horror has been particularly effective at mining the contradictions of these competing narratives, but pornography is likewise addressing the issue in even more overt and self-conscious ways. Laura Kipnis argues that, quote, one of pornography's large themes is that we're adults who were once children, in whom the social has been instilled at great and even tragic cost, end quote. One expects to find explicit sexuality in material for adults. Indeed, the presence or absence of sexuality is one of the primary factors in whether a given text is designated as being for adults or for children, as Tribunella points out. What makes fairy tales' adult-level naughtiness so enticing is the transgression of cultural constructions of the innocence of childhood and of its stories. The recovery narrative is exciting precisely because it relies upon the innocent story about fairy tales to work. As James R. Kincaid might put it, the best thing about innocence is the threat of its violation. And roughing up a story for kids is thrilling in a way that pre-roughed up stories for adults are not. When pornography turns to fairy tales, an interesting dance begins. Fairy tales, as the recovery narrative rightly asserts, do in fact already contain an enormous amount of material our culture deems unsuitable for children. While this is usually figured as violence, the majority of fairy tales are concerned with romance and desire, and numerous scholars have articulated the tensions surrounding gender and sexuality that exist within the fairy tale genre. Now, pornography takes these tensions and hyperbolically expands upon them. While much fairy tale pornography relies upon the simple shock value of dirtying up, a story associated with a young audience, other films engage more intensively with the individual tale being addressed and with the genre of fairy tales as a whole. Now, today, I'll be discussing pornographic films that invoke the tale of Beauty and the Beast. Now, this story, one of the best-known romantic fairy tales, Linda J. Lee points out that Beauty and the Beast, along with Cinderella, are the most common plots in genre romance, is a popular subject for fairy tale porn. According to Betsy Hearn, folk and literary versions of ATU 425C, quote, reveal more clearly than any other tale the interweaving of social custom and law with fantasy narratives. Specifically, the social reality of young women forced to marry unappealing older men, and the necessity that these women learn to accommodate themselves to their fate. Lawrence Todorok Vilnas argues that, quote, the story may be viewed as a female Pilgrim's Progress in Marina Warner's terms. It deals with the violence of male sexuality which the heroine must learn to tame and accept, and which marks the main stage of her education into womanhood, end quote. Linda J. Lee concurs, quote, typical interpretations representations of Beauty and the Beast focus on the transformative power of love or on a shift in the female protagonist's attitude about sex from revulsion to pleasure. End quote. However, the majority of pornographic films that invoke Beauty and the Beast replace this emphasis on the heroine's psychological and emotional journey with a spectacle of an encounter with the eroticized other. Unlike other fairy tale porn films, the four movies under consideration today do not engage with the plot of fairy tale. Without exception, each of these movies consists of a series of unconnected vignettes of sex between a conventionally attractive performer, usually a normatively feminine white woman, and a performer marked as freakishly other, by virtue of age, old, race, non-white, or gender identity, non-cisgender. Beauty and the Beast, 2004, the year 2004, which I don't have here, is a Spanish-language film with very little dialogue, written and directed by Sonia H. This film equates beastliness with the elderly body. Except for the final scene, each pornographic encounter, all heterosexual, is between a young and an old performer, 3 old men and 2 old women. The camera lingers upon the spectacles of old and young flesh together and eroticizes the issues faced by elderly bodies. The older male performers often resort to dildos to penetrate their female companions when erections are unable to be sustained. The final episode is between 2 young performers. Given the film's title, perhaps this is meant to be read as a post-transformation scene. In all the other films, beastliness, following the fairy tale, is figured specifically as an exaggerated, potentially threatening masculinity. Beauty and the Butch of 2008, and there are there are sequels to this one. Beauty and the Butch. I'm going to hold these up and then I'll pass them around, so if you really don't want to see a bunch of naked people, then you can just pass it on without looking. So here we go. It's produced by the company L Factor Productions, whose tagline is "Made for Women Who Love Women." It's the most playful. The film is an amateurish production with refreshingly average-looking performers who actually talk and engage with each other. I know. In this film, Butch does not just refer to women whose appearance is one of masculine self-presentation, but also to femme women who adopt a dominant role over their more submissive and always conventionally femme partners. By replacing Beast with Butch, the film pokes fun at mainstream heterosexual porn's distaste for non-normatively feminine women. The beastliness of the Butch is not a threat to their enthusiastic femme partners, but rather to the privacy of the usual assumed porn audience of heterosexual men with conventional tastes. Gender and sexual nonconformity is likewise equated with beastliness in the 1982 film Beauty and the Beast, and at the same time excessive masculinity, in the form of the exaggeratedly huge penis, is also figured as beastly. This film appears to be stitched together from 2 entirely separate films. The bulk of the movie takes the form of a pseudo-anthropological documentary featuring Dr. Dick Richards, MD, introducing the penis jokes. They just make themselves. There's actually a whole article, I think it was by Linda Neal, about whether it's appropriate for people doing pornography studies to give in to the temptation to make horrible puns. Is it appropriate? I'm all for it, obviously. Introducing, in quasi-scientific language, scenes of sexually deviant behavior and non-normative bodies. Trans and intersex people are a particular focus, and the film treats them with a mixture of prurience and a weird sort of sympathy. Richard's narration highlights the gender transgression as having immense erotic power. There are extended interviews with a trans woman and an intersex woman within the film. These performers are given space to discuss their histories and relationship to notions of gender and sexual identity, which allows them a bit more dignity than most mainstream films, never mind porn films. However, little people having sex with average-sized women and men who have sex with blow-up dolls are treated with mockery, which undercuts the comparably humanizing treatment of trans and intersex people. These scenes are presented as comedy interludes rather than titillating erotic spectacles. It doesn't really help that the blow-up doll fetishist looks just like Jeff Goldblum. It's kind of upsetting, actually. The other form of beastliness on display in the 1982 film is that of exaggerated masculinity in the form of an enormous penis. There are several scenes featuring a photo shoot of a white man with a penis that hangs down to his knees. However, the majority of the scenes of phallic beastliness center around the legendary black black performer, Long Dong Silver. This is him. Long Dong Silver, here, you can pass that on. Long Dong, whose 18-inch penis was actually a prosthetic, you'll be glad to know, created by makeup artist Jane Morrow, appears as himself in a couple scenes as part of a burlesque act introduced by Richards and Morrissey. But he and the female performer Sika, by the way, that's not Sika on the front of that's just some random woman. And Long Dong Silver. Again, this whole movie feels like just cobbled together from a bunch of stuff. Yeah, I know porn films, shockingly, do not always have the highest aesthetic qualities. but he and the female performer Sika are the stars of the apparently entirely separate second film that has been stitched into the pseudo-documentary. This story features Southern belle Sika eagerly awaiting the return of her black lover Long Dong from the American Civil War. When he appears, he's wearing a Confederate uniform. Then he proceeds to deflower Sika's innocent belle. And if you want an image that is designed specifically to, get right at the terrified id of straight white American Southern men in particular, there you go. And I think that's the whole point of the film, right? This portion of Beauty and the Beast, as well as my final film, Beauty and the 14-inch Beast, I'll save this. It falls into the extremely problematic genre of interracial porn. Now, Linda Williams argues that this genre, which usually features black men and white women, can function in a subversive and progressive manner, citing the film's, quote, complex flirtation with the now historically prescribed stereotype operating on both sides of the line. Thus, the very companies that once effectively policed the racial border now work in the service of eroticizing its transgression. However, Daniel Murray points out that these films trade on, quote, a racialized attraction that reduces people of color to abnormal or hyperfeminized body parts and phenotypes, while constructing interracial sex as fetishistic perversions for the pleasure of spectators coded as white. In particular, the Long Dong Silver films and Beauty and the 14-inch Beast make the ithyphallic black man into a kink, and equate the threatening specter of black male sexuality as specifically savage and beastly. In these stories, it is not simply generic masculinity, which is presented as savage and undomesticated, but a specifically racialized masculinity that relies upon the racist social evolutionary rhetorics of the black man, as represented by an iconographically enormous and gorgeous penis, as both ultimate ideal and threat to the white women in the films, and to the, quote, white male audience who remains present ideologically, even if absent from the mise-en-scene, as Bernardi puts it. The concept of threat is most apparent in the 1982 Beauty and the Beast, which is going around, in which Sika's angelic blonde, the Southern belle in virginal white, is ravished by Long Dong Silver. In every sex scene in the film, Long Dong's partners seem to be in as much pain as pleasure. This is in contrast to Beauty and the 14-inch Beast from West Coast Productions, which is a company that specializes in interracial films. This movie, by contrast, comes across as rather cheerful and good-natured. Despite the DVD cover, which features a shot of a large penis, the 14-inch Beast, there's a hole through it, which you can analyze. I'm not even going to go there. And a visibly disconcerted woman. Look at her face. For those of you who can't see, she's like, which, And also, something I just noticed is that this looks like a white male penis. It looks like a white guy's penis, but all the men in it are black, which is interesting. Again, the artwork and it's not always coherent on these films. And a visibly disconcerted woman in each of the sex scenes. But each of the sex scenes between a number of different performers, but all well-endowed black men and thin white women, all the sex scenes appear happy, with one or two being rather sweet and romantic, and others is kind of giddy and giggly. One of the male performers, he's like, yay, I get to do this, it's really cute, actually. He's also really cute. The title aside, this film doesn't quite cater quite as overtly to an assumed white male heteronormative audience, because the sex scenes are not presented as overtly transgressive, like, ooh, these big scary men. With these women who are being, these innocent white girls who are being deflowered. Like I said, a lot of the scenes are kind of romantic and they're cute, like the vibe is much friendlier. They are presented as more as outgrowths of particular female performers' desires for, as one says, quote, big black cock. Not that desire, of course, is not influenced by racist stereotypes. Desire, of course, can both transgress and reinforce hegemonic structures, but the framing of that desire in the film isn't fetishized quite the same way it is in like the 1982 Beauty and the Beast, or the way the elderly body is fetishized as being critically transgressive than other Beauty and the Beast. Anyway, fairy tale porn films marry the historical socio-cultural narratives of desire and anxiety to the contemporary iterations of those same issues through the lens of explicit sex. While pornographic films are often dismissed as proverbially worthless, these narratives, like the similarly marginalized forms of romance and fan fiction and indeed fairy tale, provide crucial insights into discourses of sexuality and its mechanisms